Hello everybody. Um, just out here in my workshop, and I'm just finishing up doing some pruning of my gooseberries here. And when I'm done with the pruning, what I like to do is just come in here and I take cuttings from all my gooseberries, actually from all my plants. And for any of those that have those canes that bent over and touched the ground, they formed roots, and so I just pot those ones straight up. When they don't have roots and I have all of these nice long branches and twigs here, instead of just throwing them out, I'm going to basically pot them up. And so I basically get the size of pot I'm going to use. So this is a 1 gallon pot or a half-gallon pot, or maybe just a solo cup, whatever size pot you're using. And I measure out the thickness of each one of these, cut them off where they're just going to have 1 or 2 buds sticking above the soil surface or the rooting medium that I'm going to be using. And when I get that done, I'm simply going to dip them into one of my rooting hormone compounds here. So it doesn't really matter which ones I use. I don't really care too much. I prefer to use the gel type, but I also have a powdered one. And you want to get the root stem that's basically a root stem number 3, or I believe it has the, what do you call that? The highest concentration of IBA rooting powder. So that's 0.8%. Because I'm doing hardwood cuttings. Now if I'm doing softwood or semi-hardwood cuttings, I don't need a strong one, so I can get away with rooting compound that's a number 2 or a number 1. But just taking advantage of all the cuttings to propagate more berry bushes, and yep, simple process. But once you start getting a lot of bushes, it becomes a lot of work. But it's very simple work, it's very rewarding work, and yeah, I'm going to be able to fill up quite a number of backyard orchards with this batch. So I've just gone through that giant pile of longer trimmings, and I put them down to smaller cuttings that are going to fit into my 1 gallon pot here. And what you're going to find here is that you've got trimmings of many different thicknesses. And so the rule of thumb is that you're looking for cuttings that fit the pot with only a few buds sticking up, and the rest of the buds will be below the soil line. So the thickness that you're going for is the gauge of a pencil or a 5-inch nail. They're pretty similar. So this is more or less the ideal thickness that you're looking for. But if you're going for a 4-inch nail, or even somewhere between a 3-inch nail and a very large bamboo skewer, like a thick, good quality bamboo skewer, those are the ones that I prefer to use. Now, that doesn't mean I'm going to throw away all the skinny bits here. So the skinny bits, they're not likely to root, but there's still a good possibility, so there's no sense throwing it away. Now, it's not like I'm going to waste rooting hormone on these little ones, so what I would do is just throw them into a little solo cup with some holes drilled in the bottom and just see what takes. The only thing I would do is that for all those little buds, I would strip the buds off the bottom, and everywhere you strip the bud off, it's going to leave a leaf scar. And where those buds are is where cell differentiation takes place. So if the stick, any part of the stick that is above the soil, should produce a leaf, I mean especially if it has a bud on it, and anywhere where the leaf scar is below the soil, that should form roots. So there's still a lot of chances for these to actually form roots. Same with the thicker ones. Same thing with these ones. So before I pot them up, what I'm going to do is strip all the buds off the stems here, being careful of those little spiky bits, and then I will dip them into rooting hormone. Now you don't need rooting hormone necessarily. especially when you're playing the game of numbers and you have a few hundred to deal with. I certainly don't need that many, so I don't care if I only have a 50% success ratio. If I don't use rooting hormones, that's still going to be, if I've got 100 sticks, I've got 50 plants. I'm pretty good with that. But I can use rooting hormone, and you're only basically going to cut the bottom, or coat the bottom of it anyways. And even if you leave a little cut on the side here, exposing a bit of the cambium, and put the rooting hormone along the side, then it's only going to cover that little bit here, and you may have roots form on here, you may not. But I've always had more success growing roots, more often than not, actually grow up along those leaf scars anyways, more than they do at the tip where I cut them. Even if I cut them on a bud, or cut them at an angle, or scrape them and put rooting hormone on them, those actually aren't the places that form roots for me. They form along the leaf scars further up. So that is what I'm about to do now. All right, now we are a little bit further on in the process here. And so I've got 3 different piles of cuttings that I'm going to try to propagate. And so I've got the ones that are about closer to a pencil in width and thickness. And then I've got the medium-sized one. And then I've got a bunch of smaller twig bits. Now I'm not using the really small twiggy bits because there's really no point in using that. I've got plenty of cuttings to work with right here. So on the largest ones, on most of these, I've actually put on a bit of a wound by scraping off the bark down to the green cambium layer. And what that's going to do is all along the bottom here and on those wounded areas, what's going to happen is a callus is going to form along those areas, and those areas are going to be where roots should develop on these thicker branches. So I'm just going to do it on this pile of thicker stems just to make sure there's much more rooting surface or potential rooting surface for these ones. I'm not going to worry about that for these ones, and certainly not for those. Also, I'm going to put a rooting compound on the thick stems and on the medium stems, but I'm really not going to bother with those little ones. I'm not too concerned about them. If they root, that's awesome. That's just extra plants, but I don't really need them. So I'm just going to put the rooting compound on these guys here. So over here I have my rooting compound, and I have my pot that's ready, and I put in about 3/4 of an inch to an inch of potting soil in the base of this. So what I'm going to do is get the compound on there, on the sticks, get the sticks in the pot, fill the pot up with soil, and then water in from the top, and let it sink down and drain into a pie plate or a small tray. And I'm going to keep it in that tray for the duration of the time I think it's going to take for them to grow roots, about 3 weeks to 5 weeks. And then I'm going to take these out, open up the pot, and see what I got. So time to go on with the get the next phase done here. Alright, so we're at the final stage of the process here, and I just did a little bit of a tidy up. And what we have here now are 3 different pots of 3 different sized cuttings. So the larger cuttings there, medium-sized cuttings here, and my little thin pieces right there. So I've got a lot of those little thin pieces here. So what I did is I just put them in the pot, filled the pot up with basically composted wood chip, mostly composted, and watered from the top to the point where there's just a little bit of water hanging around the bottom. Not enough to touch the bottoms of these cuttings, but enough so that if the soil starts drying out, the wood chips in here is going to wick up the water that's in the bottom of the tray, and as that empties and dries out, I'll know to add more water, just enough to keep the wood chips hydrated, which will then in turn keep the cuttings hydrated, without getting them waterlogged. So over here I also have the cuttings that I had. The branches basically folded over onto the ground and then they took roots, and so when I was doing my pruning I just dug these ones up and potted them up. And so these are also going to turn into brand new healthy plants. So that's basically it for taking your prunings and your cuttings and potentially turning them into a lot of brand new plants. And I'm not going to profess to be any sort of professional doing this. I'm just, a gardener, likes to hang out in the backyard and wants to grow a larger fruit orchard. And this is just the real way to do it without costing a lot of money. As I said, you don't really need the rooting hormone. If you're playing the game of numbers, just shove a bunch of cuttings into some dirt and more than likely you're going to have some pretty decent success. And out of what, maybe 200 cuttings? Maybe, I don't know. This is going to be more than enough fruit bushes for me to, again, fill up my backyard and, well, maybe somebody else's. All right, so I'm going to link to another video to show, if you want a sneak peek of what this is going to look like in, say, 3 to 5 weeks, I'm going to link to another video, and you can see what happens when you break open one of these pots of cuttings and to see what it looks like and how the roots have formed. All right, that's it for now. I'm going to get these out to the shade house, and so they can have a little bit of peace and quiet now that I'm done disturbing them and mutilating them. They're going to need some peace and quiet in a nice shady yet full of ambient light in order to slowly leaf out and hopefully develop those root systems necessary for potting them up later. All right, thanks for watching. Excuse the wind, but I'm just out here in the little portable shed, mini garage thing, whatever you want to call these little tent structures, and this is my shade house that I'm using for propagating my fruit bushes and more fruit bushes. And more fruit bushes. Alright, we are out here in my backyard in a small little fenced in area I have for my propagated plants, just to keep them a little bit out of the direct sunlight and a little bit more out of the wind. But I wanted to just let you know, this is early spring, the following year, after I took my rooted cuttings and potted them up into solo cups. I just wanted to show everyone what the growth has been on these little sticks. So these have been potted up. They were sitting in these cups all summer and left to overwinter. And since then, they're now here in the early spring leafing out and putting on new growth. These guys are a little bit more in the shade as compared to these guys. So yeah, those are my white currants, and I've got some red currants here, and they've all put on quite a bit of new growth here. So doing it in this method, the method of just sticking them into cups of, well, basically groups of cuttings into cups of rotted wood chips, and with just a little bit of rooting hormone on them, can easily allow you to propagate plants. And does a pretty good job. Okay, so we're going to go on to the next section of another section I have where I just shoved them in the ground, and we're going to take a look and see what happened over there. Okay, we're back out in my garden area in the space we were here last year, and this is where I basically shoved some of those white currant and red currant sticks in the ground that had already leafed out but didn't even have roots. So I just took a nail, poked a hole in the ground, shoved these sticks into it till it bottomed out in the ground at the bottom of the hole, and as you can see, pretty much no effort whatsoever. Almost all of them have come back. So I've got some white currants, a few more here, and a couple of red currants on the side. So they do pretty good, just shoving them in the ground and waiting for them to root out. There's a few over here in the corner that are just sticks, so they didn't make it. So can't tell you how many there are, what, 30, 40, 50 plants, and I think I had maybe 5 failures on them, so it's not too bad. So again, this is just a simple way to propagate fruit bush cuttings, and it's pretty successful. Just take your sticks from whatever prunings you're doing and shove them in the ground. Now we're going to take a look at 2-year cuttings. So I took older wood and just shoved it in the ground, no rooting hormone, no anything, and we're going to take a look and see how those did. Okay, here we are at the back of the orchard here in a nice, well, what is a very shady spot in later in the year. But right now these guys are going to get lots of sun without all the overhanging leaf cover. So what I have here are red currants, and so on this side I just had second and even third year pruned cuttings. Yeah, that's not first year's growth, just second and third year. And over on this side was some leftover first year cuttings. And as you can see, a lot of them are doing just fine. Now there's quite a few more of these second years that didn't take, and they're just kind of dead sticks, except some of these, as a second year, has actually put out a new shoot at the bottom. So even the second year cuttings, even if they don't sprout off the tips, because that was a first year shoot, so that would have been the second year shoot down here. Even if they don't sprout off the tips, they'll just grow from here, brand new shoots out at the base here. So they did just fine. I'm looking at more of 60% success. There's a few dead ones back here. They didn't take these guys back here, but still pretty good for doing absolutely nothing but taking my sticks and shoving them in the ground in a nice shady location that stays pretty much damp and moist throughout the year, because this is close to a ditch on the side of my property that runs down here. So this has stayed completely damp, the soil, and nice and shady, and they did just fine. Alright, that's just what I wanted to show you guys. A year after I shoved the sticks in the ground, and these are pretty much ready for being dug out and potted up. Okay, thanks for watching.